If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, people whose houses are haunted by shadow people, demons, etc., tell me your stories. When I was little, I had a loft bed with a desk underneath. I've always been a pretty heavy sleeper. I could fall asleep at a concert, so it was strange when I began waking up at 3 in the morning every morning. What was even stranger were the noises coming from the attic. Shuffling, knocking, and boxes moving. My 9-year-old brain rationalized it as an animal or bird that had gotten in. After a few weeks of shit sleep, I decided to knock back on my ceiling the shave and a haircut pattern because I was bored and hadn't interacted with whatever was in the attic. I waited in silence for a few minutes until I was about to fall back asleep, and then I heard it. From the ceiling, a foot from my face, it knocked back the pattern. Every night when I woke up, I'd knock and sometimes get a response. It gradually stopped over the years, but I still wake up at 3 a.m. every night. It's weird, but it only happens in my room. I sleep fine in hotels and other houses. 13 years later, and I've just been getting weird vibes around my house. I feel like I'm being watched. I sometimes hear someone saying my name, most notably before bed, and whatever they say is very close to my ear. I can feel their breath as they whisper, and it freaks me out so much that it takes me hours to get back to sleep. The shuffling in the attic also started up again, but I don't want to knock back anymore. There's a lot of weird shit that happens, things get moved, my dogs and cats stare at the same blank spot, but these are just what's been currently happening. I just don't know what to do anymore. A pastor died of a heart attack in the house I grew up in, before we owned it. When I was a baby, I was sick with croup. Apparently, in the night, I was having trouble breathing and was beginning to suffocate. The ceiling light fixture in my nursery fell out of the ceiling and smashed on the floor, waking my parents, who found me choking. My parents are absolutely convinced the pastor's ghost intervened and saved my life. I used to live in a basement apartment when I was in graduate school. The landlady lived in the main house, and while she herself was super nice and cool, her house always felt really off to me. However, she charged a reasonable amount of rent, and I was only 2 miles from school. About a week or two after I moved in, I went to bed, and the apartment was pitch black at night. If my landlady ever wanted to speak to me, I would hear the doors above the stairs unlock, and she would call out to me. One night, I heard movement on the steps, but I didn't hear her unlock the doors, and it was probably 2 in the morning. She certainly didn't call me, saying she needed to talk to me. I hear these heavy steps descending the stairs, but I'm so scared that I shrink further into my bed to hide. The floor begins to creak towards my door, and then nothing for a few seconds. I'm not sure if it's safe to relax and go back to bed. Then I hear the door start to turn. My fear makes me so scared that I pull the covers over my head to hide. I prayed the whole time under the covers. The next thing I know, it's finally morning. I stayed in that apartment for 2 years. When it was my graduation, I slept in a hotel because there was no room for my family to sleep. That night in the hotel was the first restful sleep I had in what felt like forever. Apart from specters appearing at random intervals, the most chilling was the night before Christmas. For background, the spirit in our home had proved to be very possessive of me and kept attempting to keep me from my boyfriend and win my attention, maybe affection. Every night when he would be working into the wee hours, I would fall asleep in our room with the bedroom door unlocked to grant him easy access. Every night when he got home, it was firmly locked. I heard him calling for me in other rooms while showering, and I would emerge to find the house always empty and BF at the gas station or in the backyard. It would sit next to me on the bed, appear to me while bathing, and rap on the wall when I was alone. Always after my attention. My then boyfriend was deployed, and I was just starting on a glass of wine, settling onto the living room couch. We had decorated right before he left, but I was lonely and hadn't heard from him in a day or two. A few tears slipped, and I heard a sound. No branch had moved, there was no breeze or fan, but a glass ball had gently dropped from the tree onto the wood floor without breaking. I stared at it as it stayed in place for a second under the tree, then slowly rolled 4 feet in my direction, over the lip of the thick, heavy rug, which shouldn't have been possible, and stopped directly in front of my feet. The first of many gifts to cheer me up, I received a vintage children's card, a queen of spades with torn edges and yellowed paper, shortly after. I don't know where it came from. It appeared one day, and when I would throw it out, it would appear somewhere else. The garage. The windowsill. Under the bed. One time, my boyfriend threw it out. As if in angry retaliation, when I was in the bath that evening, the spirit of a woman sat on my chest, pressing me into the water. I couldn't move, it was like a night terror, but with the risk of drowning. She had such a twisted, hateful face. After a moment of clawing at the sides of the tub, I was released. We sold the house earlier this year and moved across the country. We found out that the previous owner had been a depressed, manic hoarder who kept animals she, seemingly, abused in the home. I don't know what had happened to her, if it's guaranteed she died in the house or what, but the spirit that dwelled there was the unhappiest thing I'd ever encountered. I almost feel sorry for it. My grandmother passed from pneumonia back in 2017 and left us an estate deep out in the country. I won't give the exact location, but it is in the deep south, and the area is notorious for having some of the most brutal slavery plantations back in the early 1800s. I can't even begin to, and don't really want to, talk about some of the atrocities that occurred in that area. So, the estate was in our name for a few months, and I decided that after I graduated, I would stay there for the summer to work on the house, landscape, and install a miniature version of a solar field. She had been living with a gas-powered generator for her electricity. I should have known what I was in for after I left the main highway. I would later learn from my mother that she had groceries delivered and was essentially a recluse because she didn't have her driver's license. I had to go down miles of pothole-ridden dirt roads to finally get to the entrance of the estate. The driveway is about 500 yards long with trees that, for some reason, bend towards the road, so that their canopy almost covers it completely and keeps it in shadow even during the day. I pull up in front of the house, and everything is overgrown. There is Spanish moss growing on the house, weeds everywhere, tall brush and briar. The day was uneventful. I explored, found the well, carved dolls and antiques in the attic, and an old rotting cellar that I think was used to keep things cool in the summer. I went around back to take some measurements and saw some rocks at the tree line. It was not a rock. Once I got closer, I quickly realized they were old gravestone markers. They went back into the thick brush further than I could see, but I counted 27 of them, and there were probably way more. It certainly didn't look like an intentional graveyard. I didn't want to risk getting covered in ticks, so I didn't go any further. Who knows how many are actually there? Hundreds? Night rolls in, so start a fire out front. I probably subconsciously didn't want to be near the graveyard, but at the time I just thought it made more sense. I get a pot of water boiling with my back to the house, looking through the smoke. Directly behind the fire was the mouth of the tree-covered driveway, and it looked like a twisted mouth at night. The lapping fire made the tops of the trees look like they were moving, almost like the upper teeth were wanting to gnash downward, and the throat was pitch black. It was a little cloudy, but there was a half moon, so I could still see pretty well out there, but 3 yards past the trees, the driveway was so dark it looked like a portal to an abyss. Yet, somehow, through the smoke, I could see something darker moving in the abyss. I can't really describe it, but it was so dark that it had like a negative shimmer. I pulled out my flashlight and pointed it down the driveway immediately, like I didn't take my eyes off of the driveway for a second. I shined the light on the dark figure, and there was nothing there. Just a dirty driveway and weird trees. I kept looking around periodically as I made my dinner but didn't see anything else. I figured it was the shadow of a cloud or something. I'm starting to feel uneasy at this point, like I'm being watched. I literally checked my phone to make sure I still had service, and I did. Go inside to settle in for the night. I thought it would be weird to stay in my grandmother's bed, so I took a second-story guest room at the end of the hall closet to the bathroom. I fell asleep pretty quick. The old down mattress on there was actually legit. Wake up to strange moans. It sounds both distant and in my head. I thought I was dreaming at first, but I grabbed my phone to look at the time, and it was about 2 a.m. Moaning was deep and turned to wailing. I heard loud claps and screaming. At this point, I'm in survival mode. I'm up and creeping towards the stairs, looking for any movement and trying to figure out where the sound is coming from. Outside. Go to the window and peer out. Screaming stops. There's nothing there. I'm freaking out, my heart is pounding, and I'm thinking I might be going crazy or something. I go around to all the windows, fearing people have been going there thinking it was abandoned. There was no movement or sound anywhere. I even went up to a few second-story windows to view everything from every angle, but all was still and clear. After about 30 minutes, I decided I'd sleep on the sofa that was in the middle of the first floor, kind of like a hub. My grandmother's room was down a short hallway that connected to it. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard a sound, a small creak, from the direction of her room. Then I heard a faint, pushy whisper. I swear to you, it sounded like my grandmother, and she said one desperate word, "Run." And I did. I was at my truck in less than 10 seconds. I floored it under those ducked-up trees, and there were hundreds of darker than dark shadows lined up under the trees. I got out of there, but then hit a pothole on the back roads and thought I popped a tire. I didn't give a duck. The wheels would have to literally fall off to make me stop. I ended up going to a shitty hooker motel and never felt safer. It was next to an early century unsanctified graveyard where they buried the unbaptized, as well as murderers, suicides, and stonemasons. The graveyard was bad enough. The house was never scary, it just felt like it had a past, and you never felt quite alone. This house was split into 2 flats. It was the first brothel in our city's history. The first night I stayed, it sounded like there was a faint party in my lounge. My girlfriend woke up one night screaming that there was a fire and a man in white was shouting at her to get out. She never set foot in the house again. Another time, I locked myself out of the house and couldn't find my key, so my friend drove me to my girlfriend's house, who had a spare. When returning, as we got out of the car, my friend saw a key appear in midair, and I heard it hit the pavement. A crystal shop lady I befriended offered to cleanse the house. She buried amethyst points around the boundaries. She did a prayer with a large quartz crystal. The whole room lit up, and coins and lighters fell from the ceiling. She believed it was a little boy trapped who had gone into the light. Once, while having friends around, I looked in the hallway and caught a very quick glimpse of someone in a flower-patterned dress moving quickly into the bathroom. My friends were all wearing jeans. Finally, while moving out, I moved a drawer, and a photo fell out. It was an old lady standing in the garden wearing that same dress. After I moved out, the house was repainted, and a year or 2 later, it was bulldozed, and now there is a memorial native carving in its place. The energy still feels dank. My advice would be to never move into an old house that is furnished. Furniture can hold a lot of old energy. When I was a younger child, I remember seeing glowing red eyes hanging in the air in my dark living room. I thought our house had werewolves or vampires. There was a phase in 3rd grade when glowing orbs would hang out in my room for several minutes at a time, which I interpreted as aliens. My childish mind was trying to make sense of things, but I definitely had a fear of the dark, specifically in our house. Most places were fine in the dark, but in our house, I always felt like I was being watched by something with malicious or, at best, neutral intentions. Paranormal things ramped up for me in high school, but to remain chronological, I had a cousin stay at our house one summer while most of us were on vacation between my 7th and 8th grades. My cousin Billy was helping my dad with various projects. One night, my cousin was going to bed in one bedroom, later dubbed the spooky room. Outside, in the dark, he saw a figure leave our garage and our entire house. My dad, right? Billy, Billy, Billy. Help me, my cousin heard my father shouting. Billy rushed to check on my father. My father had been sleeping and was irritated by Billy's presence. Billy went back to bed, only to hear it again. Billy, Billy, Billy. Help, help, help. Again, cousin Billy rushed to check on my father, who was fine and confused by Billy's urgency. Billy slept on the couch that night. I didn't learn about this until years later. A couple years later, my brother moves away to college, and I move into his old bedroom, the spooky room. It's my freshman year of high school. I was always particularly creeped out by this room, but, hey, new changes are often intimidating. One morning, I woke up to see a perfectly drawn skull on the dust on the window across from where my head lies when I sleep. This was the layer of dust facing the inside of the room, not the outside. No one had access to the room except me and my parents, who are not pranksters by any means. I show my mom and wipe it away. A couple weeks later, I'm studying in that bedroom. It's night, and the lights are on, so the windows turn into mirrors. I look up from my bed towards that skull window, and I see in the reflection a white silhouette standing behind me. I hold my gaze for maybe 10 seconds, just trying to grasp what I'm looking at. I eventually turn my head around and see nothing. I look back at the window and see nothing in the reflection. I slept on the couch for the next few nights. A couple more weeks later, I'm lying in bed, listening to a late-night radio show. The lights are off. Looking through that same skull window, I see a similar white silhouette stride past my window. I slept on the couch for several more nights. Over the course of weeks, I see more things drawn on the dust of the windows. Generally, it's scribbles and shapes. I'm scared they might be some sort of curse or something, so I wipe them away. Out of curiosity, I put a sticky note on the window that says "Please write below." Several days later, a perfect circle appears around the note, as if someone had put the base of a paint can up against the surface. This wasn't like the finger drawings I'd seen earlier. But one drawing really stood out. I decided to recreate it in MS Paint before I wiped it away. Over the years, I've shared this with friends and colleagues, and they mostly come to the same conclusion as I did before I told them my interpretation. But, yeah, for the majority of high school, I slept with the light on. I avoided that side of the house like the plague. Little things here and there, but nothing huge. Until it's my senior year of high school. I'm in the living room with my mother watching TV, and the clothes dryer finishes. This dryer is directly down the hallway from the spooky room. I suck it up and head over to empty the machine, getting my usual feeling of immense dread and paranoia as I enter that side of the house. I bend over and start unloading the laundry, and my mind goes blank. And I lose control over my motor functions. My arms go limp. And, beyond my control, my body stands up. And I hear a masculine voice take a deep breath and hiss in my ear. I immediately regain control of my body, and I GTFO. Around that time, my aunt comes to stay with us for a month or two. She has no idea what I've experienced there. But literally on her first day there, the bathroom door slams hard on her, and she immediately has us smudge the house to ward off whatever's there. I woke up one night being pulled out of bed. My lower body was off the bed, and my top half was still on. I jumped up and turned the lights on, thinking my nephew was just trying to scare me. No one was there. My bedroom door was closed, no one was under the bed, no one was in the closet, no one was in the bathroom. I thought maybe it was a nightmare and I had somehow moved myself halfway off the bed. Well, for 2 weeks after that, something would start tugging on my covers at the foot of my bed, slowly pulling them off of me. I would jerk them back up onto the bed and tuck them under my feet. I slept with the lights on for a very long time after that. I hardly slept at night, but I would fall asleep from exhaustion only to have my blankets pulled slowly down again. One night while staying at my sister's house, I was sleeping in a bed that had a metal headboard and footboard. I was awakened by what sounded like a metal pipe being slammed against the footboard. As in the other story, I jumped up, turned on the lights, and no one was there. I could feel the vibrations as the bed was hit, and it hit it about 10 times in a row. One house I lived in had a shadow person. It would go down the hallway towards the bedrooms. I saw it, and all 3 of my kids saw it. My now ex-husband did not believe us. One day the kids and I went shopping, my husband stayed home. When we got back, he looked at me very seriously and said, "I saw your shadow, man." I've never felt so vindicated in my life. One night I woke up at 3 a.m. with my cell phone light on and unlocked, a 2008 BlackBerry. I looked up at the door entrance and saw a shadow figure looking at me with the bathroom light behind him. I thought it was my cousin, but he later told me he wasn't home that night. I looked at my phone, and it was a video with a negative effect doing what looked like sit-ups. I deleted the video and went to sleep. The worst was about 6 months later, when I finally slept next to my parents' room because of the many ghostly encounters. I was laying in bed, unable to sleep, so I looked out the window, and a shadow from behind my dresser ran out of my room. Annoyed, I turned to face the wall. Then I saw Medusa-type hair creeping up from my bedroom wall. Once it got to the top of the thing's forehead, I turned back around and tried to go back to sleep. My older brother and his friends saw the worst. They would mention years later that the cute little cow statues we had in our room would move around at night. I moved into a house built in the 1890s several years ago. A few weeks after moving in, before meeting any neighbors, I heard heavy footsteps coming down the attic steps outside my bedroom. I then heard footsteps on the staircase for the first or second floor, and someone said my name. My husband was 30 miles away, nobody in town knew me or had access to my house, and there was nobody outside at the time. I grabbed my baby, phone, and keys and ran outside to wait. We searched the house from top to bottom and never found anything, but I've heard the footsteps multiple times. We have no upstairs plumbing or HVAC, so it remains unsolved. I've also heard music playing downstairs, talking to previous owners. This was common. It's just commonplace now, and we don't always have stuff going on. A lot of major remodeling has been done, so I guess maybe that's why it's happening. Honestly, the repairs are scarier than anything else. My sister and I were just reminiscing the other day about this house we grew up in. We lived in a townhouse in a complex of low-income rental homes for most of our childhoods. Very bad vibes in general. None of the 3 of us kids were ever alone in any part of the house at any time because we were dead terrified to be. I peed on the couch once because my mother refused to accompany me upstairs to the washroom, and I was too scared to go alone. The house was built more upward than outward, so it had a long, steep staircase and long hallways. The bathroom was at the end of the hallway, and you had to cross the hall at the top of the stairs to turn on the hall light. We've collectively experienced a few events ranging from bad feelings, recurring nightmares, strange occurrences, and apparitions. Strange events include my sister walking to the top of the stairs and screaming at the top of her lungs that I was going to die. She never did sleepwalk again, and to her chagrin, I am alive and well. Apparitions include the man sitting at the dining room table the morning of my birthday and the child in the stairwell window that had no landing to stand on beneath it. That was the only time we saw our parents acknowledge we had a problem because we were looking at it from outside the house. We were in the driveway, all 5 of us and our dog in the car after a camping trip. We stayed with family friends that night. I grew up in a haunted house. We had this toy car that would move on its own with no batteries in it. And I mean move like 30 feet and go in circles. Sometimes it would just move for hours. My entire family saw it, and we even had uncles and aunts come over to see it. In that same house, we got the hardwood floors done, and we woke up to these 3 bird-like claw marks all over the floor and over the house. My mom bought a plant once too, from a garage sale. When she brought the plant home, I had a dream about breaking the plant, and in the dream, my mom was angry that I broke the plant. When I awoke, my mom said she saw a figure standing beside her bed all night, and the plant had been destroyed as well. She tossed the plant out, and that figure or dream never happened again. It was very common to see black shadows in broad daylight, and I remember one night when I was like 4, I woke up to 2 giant glowing red eyes inches in front of my face. Yeah, that house was haunted as duck. When I was 11, we moved into a haunted house. From the beginning, we knew that something was off. The house was big, probably built in the 1940s, and had hardwood floors. There were axe marks on the wood floors of the living room. I would have nightmares almost nightly of a man standing outside my window, his face disfigured by burns. He never tried to get in my dreams, all he did was sit there, but it was enough to terrify 11-year-old me. Our family would be sitting in the living room, and we would hear someone walking in the hallway. You could track their progress from one end of the hallway to another, eventually going into the den and disappearing. We would hear someone in the kitchen moving pots and pans around or whispering. I had shoes with hard soles, loafer style, and my family would constantly yell at me for walking in the hallway with those loud-soled shoes, but it wasn't me. They'd come out, and I would be sitting on the couch or sleeping. My brother was a baby, and we had one of those wind-up style baby swings for him. And once he fell asleep in the swing, you never wanted to rewind it because it would make such a god-awful noise. But you could sit in the living room with my brother asleep in the stopped swing, and you could watch it start to swing on its own. There were more instances, rocking chairs that rocked by themselves, the hot water in the shower would turn on by itself. After I grew up, my kids and I stayed there briefly with my parents, and my children would have the same nightmares about the burned person outside the window. About 6 years ago, a gentleman stopped by the house and had a long conversation with my stepmother. He told her that he grew up in this house in the 1960s and that his dad had mental issues and alcoholism and had tried to set his wife and kids on fire and ended up burning himself in the process. One night I was woken up at around 1 a.m. by a ghostly white hand opening the door to my bedroom. The hand was quite high off the ground, which was odd because my husband wasn't home and the only other person in the house was my 2-year-old son. I called out to my son, but there was no answer. I got out of bed and left my room, only to see that there was no one in the hallway. I switched on the hallway light and noticed smoke coming from my son's room at the other end of the hallway. I rushed over to his room and saw that he was fast asleep and still neatly tucked in under his blankets. His bed lamp was on as usual, and his bedroom window curtain had somehow ended up inside the bed lamp, which was open at the top, and the curtain had begun to smolder, which was responsible for the smoke. It looked like it was about to catch fire at any moment. I removed the curtain from the bed lamp and potentially saved our home from burning down and my son from getting killed. I still don't know whose hand it was that opened my bedroom door. I like to think that it was a guardian angel, but I spoke with some people at our church, and they warned me that there are no guardian angels and that it was most likely an evil presence trying to win my favor. The church formed a prayer group to pray for our home to banish whatever malevolent presence was inside of it, and since then we've never had any other supernatural incidents. I grew up in a haunted house that my family built in the suburbs. There were no previous owners, so there's no reason a spirit would have decided not to move on from anything, and I'm pretty sure we weren't built on some kind of prairie burial ground. I had many spooky and outright strange things happen to me in that house, and some of my friends also experienced some strange things, but my parents never did and tried to explain away everything I ever told them that happened. My bed shook at night, and I'd be too scared to turn away from the wall to see what was shaking it. I had some of the worst and most memorable nightmares to this day, over 30 years later, a voice saying something to me after I woke up. I would sleepwalk then and wake up in our living room with the television turned on to static, similar to Poltergeist. Although I definitely felt that whatever presence was there was malicious in nature, the story I usually tell is more lighthearted than most of the other stuff that happened. When I was in middle school, one of my favorite and easiest things to make was a ham and cheese sandwich heated up in the microwave to melt the cheese. I did this one day and took the plate out of the microwave, and my sandwich was missing one bite. My parents told me I did it but didn't remember. When we moved out, I was so happy to be away from that place. Supposedly, the next family that moved in had a teenage daughter who was killed in a tragic accident in the street in front of our house. She was run over accidentally by a friend or her boyfriend. Now I don't even like driving by that house. I am Wiccan, and so my house does attract energies. However, there was once one that I did not like. It happened about 5 years ago. I woke up every night at 4 a.m. sharp and had nightmares every night. When I looked around, I would have a strong feeling of being watched. Once, I saw a man with a black shirt and a hood over his head staring at the ground in the middle of my room. I've seen strange things, so I just assumed he was a visitor and asked him to leave. Well, he didn't. I complained to my mom about this, and we did research. We found him. He died near my house. I won't be using his actual name here for privacy, so let's call him James. He got killed while drunk driving a few years ago. When I saw the picture, I almost threw up and felt something cold touching my neck. We went to the place where it happened, a 5-minute drive away, and again, I felt a cold hand squeezing the back of my neck. He followed me everywhere. When I was getting ready to go to bed, stuff would actually fly out of my cabinets. The lights would flicker, and I would suffer from insomnia like never before. Eventually, we'd had enough and called in a medium friend. He got rid of him, and since then, I have never seen him again. I hope he found peace. And another weird thing that happened to me once, I think last year, my door handle went down around 11 p.m., and it opened very slowly. So I said, "Ma, I'm awake, you can come in," but I got no reply. So I said, "Ma?" Nothing. I got up, snatched my protective charms from my nightstand, and walked out of my room. No one. I called down the stairs. "Ma, were you in my room just now?" She said, "No, me and Dad have been downstairs the entire time." "Why?" So I explained, but they said it couldn't have been them. So I just went back to sleep, sealing my room another 10 times the next morning. And I have one more story about shadow people. My house has been very well protected after these incidents. I see dark shadows outside my window staring inside, not able to come in. I find that very amusing, to be honest. But my mom was cleaning a room and accidentally didn't put back the protective charms, she told me the morning after. That night, I dreamt I was in a field with black shadows following me with sharp claws, trying to kill me. When I woke up, I saw 3 shadows. One even sat on my bed. I was shocked, I have never seen them this vivid. They were shadows with white, glowing eyes. I knew they were shadow people. For some reason, I just closed my eyes to first collect myself, and when I opened them a few moments later, they had left. Those were my scary stories. My house isn't haunted, but my girlfriend is. She claims that there was a large black being that always followed her around. When she's going to sleep in the dark, she can feel it stroke her hair. Some mornings, she'll wake up with scratches, bruises, or handprints. She has those glow-in-the-dark star stickers all over her drawers and one on her closet door. Just one, about 6.5 feet up. I've seen it flicker on and off in the middle of the night. A glow-in-the-dark sticker shouldn't flicker. The only way a sticker can turn off and on again is if someone or something is standing, walking, or swaying in front of it. One night, we were in bed after the lights had been turned out, and I felt her roll over and put her arm across me. This was odd because she's never the big spoon, but I figured she let it happen. Even though the lights were out, through the glow of phone chargers and the standby lights of various electronics, I was able to make out an arm wrapped around my chest. I closed my eyes and went to grab her hand, but missed. I looked again and saw nothing. I rolled on my back and looked over at my girlfriend, all the way on the other side of the bed, with her back to me. So, not my current house, but the one I grew up in. It was built in the late 1800s. Which, for America, is pretty old for a dwelling. There was always some sort of activity. Nothing ever seemed to harbor any malice, but it was definitely present. Had I been the only one experiencing things, I would have chalked it up to me being crazy. However, there was almost always someone else around to verify what had just occurred. We had the classic someone is on the stairs, but it was coupled with footsteps running around once they reached the second floor. You'd often see things out of the corner of your eye and dismiss them. Until it would circle back and you'd get a better look. In particular, there was a little girl who frequented the doorways upstairs. She was about the height of the doorknob and would peek in and then run away. I'd often have friends over, and I'd notice their gaze lock on the door. I'd ask if they saw someone, and they'd describe her to a T without me giving any descriptors. I had an encounter with a shadow figure there as well. There was always a sort of energy there, you never felt alone. In the first house I bought at 23, There was a man made of shadows who lived in the corners of the rooms. He never faced the room, he faced the wall. I started having intense sleep paralysis several times a night when I moved there. I never had that before that house, and I never had it after I left either. I lived there for 6 years and basically just fled. I only went back for the last of my stuff because my mom made me. While I lived there, the neighbors acted all weird. The lady across the street thought I was the caretaker for some old woman. I lived alone. I told her so. She called me a liar because they could all see the old woman sitting in the big front window, watching them and such, glaring. She was supposedly a grouchy old woman who never waved back and always glared and looked angry. That neighbor spread some BS small-town gossip about me being mentally handicapped. Another neighbor told everyone that I didn't actually buy the house, my dad did, and I lived there with the old woman because I wasn't capable of living alone. Like I lied about the woman to cover my mental handicap? Edek. I never, ever saw this supposed old woman. I never thought there was anything in that house with me but the shadow man, and he was in different rooms than the one the neighbors said the lady sat in. When I finally fled that house, I moved to Cleveland. I got a really nice apartment on the lake. It was golden. I made friends with the lady in the apartment next door. She asked me one day who stays at my apartment when I'm at work. I was like, no one. What? I live alone. No one but me has keys. It's an old building, and me and the lady share a bathroom vent, so she said no, there is someone walking around my apartment during the day when I'm at work. It's clear as day, she can see my room lights through that shared vent, and there's no soundproofing in a building that old. She swore for a year that there was someone walking around my apartment when I was at work. I figured she was just hearing things. I moved again to a townhouse down the street. This was on a corner of the street, and across the street was another townhouse. Neighbors and I would wave back and forth from our porches or dining room windows. It was really close, and we were all really friendly. One day, the lady in that other townhouse asked me how my mother was doing. I was like, WTF, fine? She lives an hour away and only visited my apartment once, for like 30 minutes. We don't get together much. Then my neighbor proceeds to tell me about how when we first moved in, I live alone, y'all, they all thought we were witches because my mom was so unfriendly. She sat in the dining room window all day, glaring, and wouldn't wave back at them when they walked outside or passed her on the sidewalk, like right under the window. Mind, they could tap the window as they walked by, like right by her nose where she sat. They were that close. I tried to explain that I live alone. My neighbor didn't believe me. So I dragged her into my place and demanded to know where this second person was sleeping. Where her things were. Where she was. Etc. Neighbor never came into my home again after that, but she and her husband would mention offhand now and then that the old lady mom was still in my place, they saw her that morning, etc. I bought my next house 2 years later and moved about a mile away. I'd been there a week when my new neighbor knocked on my door, it was snowing, and asked if I knew the old lady in the driveway between our houses. I was like, what? He said that there was an old lady in the driveway between our houses a few minutes ago, and it was snowing, and they thought she must live with me, like my senile mom or something. They were about to call the cops but wanted to check first in case she just wandered outside. I told them to call the cops because I live alone. That was the last time anyone ever saw her. My actual mom visited a few days later. I told her the story, and she went around my house shouting at the old lady to leave me alone. Like, it was weird, my mom is not that kind of person, doesn't believe in that kind of thing, etc. But people have been telling me for years in multiple houses that the old woman lives with me. After my mom shouted all over the house, she seemed to be gone. It's been 4 years since anyone saw her, and I've moved again. My current house is 202 years old and quiet. I don't really believe in ghosts, but my girlfriend does. The last place we lived was a duplex that was about 100 years old and had some strange stuff that would happen on occasion. Weird noises and stuff that I could usually just say, oh, it's an old house, it's probably creaking or something. I only had one shared wall, which was in the kitchen. The bedroom was on the other side of the house, with no shared wall and nothing above me. On a regular basis, I would hear odd creaking sounds in my bedroom, like someone sitting on a bed. I always figured it was just the house creaking. My girlfriend said she saw someone in there one night, and it spooked the duck out of her. I figured she just saw a shadow or something. Then there was just random odd stuff, like the stereo turning on by itself sometimes. I should mention that the stereo had a push-button switch. Like something you could turn on with a remote. Maybe it was just old wiring or something in the house. The one time I couldn't explain anything was when we were making food. We both start hearing footsteps that sound like they are coming from above us in an old attic. I should mention that I didn't know this attic existed for a long time while I lived there. There was actually a little window up there, so I assume at some point in the house's history there was a room or something up there. So we hear these footsteps, which are clearly the sound of someone walking. It was an unmistakable gait of clunk, clunk, clunk walking on hardwood. It sounded like it was above us, but I figured it was coming from the neighbor's side and just sounded like it was above because of acoustics or something. I was like, oh, it's probably just the neighbor, and my girlfriend goes to look out the back window. So I did, and my neighbor was in the backyard with his dog, grilling something. There was nobody in his house and nobody else in our place, but the sound of someone walking was unmistakable. I didn't really believe in that stuff until then. I have no explanation for that one. When I was around the age of 11, I would see this tall silhouette of a man. He would usually appear in my room when I tried to sleep. He would stand in between my closet and room door. I would be blocked in my room with no way to get out. I just had to shut my eyes and fall asleep as fast as I could, which was hard in that circumstance. He didn't really do anything or move, he only watched. I only saw him once here, but one time I was looking at my iPad in the dark while in my playroom. I hear my mother call me for dinner down the hall, so I look up. There he was, standing in front of the right door of the double door to my playroom. I was scared shitless. All I could do was avoid him as I sprinted out the left door. I tell my family once I get to the kitchen, and none of them believe me. Needless to say, I never went in there alone at night again. The last time something weird happened in that room was when I was home alone upstairs. I forgot to mention that there is a piano that belonged to my grandmother in the playroom. While I was upstairs, I heard the piano start playing. It wasn't a pretty song, but it wasn't slamming down on the keys. I just had to lay in bed, too scared to move. I still see the man to this day. Maybe I just don't want to believe this is real, but who knows? This sort of thing only happened to me once, but it left an impression on me. I am not sure if it was an apparition or if I dreamed it. I never told anyone the truth, as I feared I would not be believed. My father and his brother, Gary, were lifelong dairy farmers in central Wisconsin. We lived close by, and labor was traded during harvests. As I got older, he would send me messages saying, "You have to go and help at Gary's today." I grew up and took over the farm, and my cousin Mike took over for his father, Gary. Gary died about 15 years ago. Mike sold the dairy herd and found other employment. I rent his land. My father passed away in 2013. In 2014, I sold the dairy herd. It was an October night in Wisconsin. My cousin Mike started a fire in the wood-fired furnace in the basement and went to bed. His sister had just gotten out of a bad relationship and was living there too. She arrived home from her job at about midnight, added some wood to the furnace, and went to bed too. Transitioning over to all crops, in the fall of 2015 I was driving around the state looking at used equipment. What I told everyone is this: passing through the nearest large town, about 25 miles away, I decided to stop and get a meal. I saw a movie playing that I wanted to see, so I stopped in to see it. Then stopped at a local bar and had a few soft drinks before returning home. Passing by his place on the way home at 3 a.m. I saw flames coming from the chimney and smoke coming from the outside basement door. I dialed 911 and ran in, yelling for them to get up. There was very little smoke in the upstairs of the house. Mike and I went downstairs and found an area about 3 feet square above the furnace on fire. We put it out with a fire extinguisher and water. The fire department arrived to put out the chimney fire. There was very little smoke damage to the house and minimal repairs, but a few more minutes and the fire would have burned up into the kitchen. The truth is, I got home about 10:30 p.m. and went to bed. Sometime a little before 3 a.m. my father, wearing his bib overalls, something he never wore after his retirement, opened my room door, turned on the light, and said, "Get up, you have to go and help out at Gary's." I remember saying, "In the morning." He then put on his most authoritative voice and said, "No, right now." I sat bolt upright in bed. My room door was open, and the light and the hallway light were on. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but I knew I had closed the door and turned off the lights. Knowing with the adrenaline rush and doubts I would not get back to sleep, I decided to dress and check on Mike's place. That's when I saw the fire and smoke. Like I said, I never told anyone the truth, as I fear no one would have believed me. I don't live in a haunted house, but the neighbor's place is definitely haunted. My grandpa has a farmland, and at the side is the farmland that belonged to his brother, but the place has something wrong. Apart from awful terrain and a lot of bugs everywhere, there is something lurking in there. Years ago I went to stay at my grandpa's farm with some cousins. We were out at night hanging out in my uncle's car's box, and we suddenly saw a small figure right on the border of both farms. It was like a man who just stood there watching us, but small like a child and totally white or yellowish like a LED light, but there was no light coming out from him. The dog at the time was there with us, and we told him to attack the thing, but he just stayed at it and ran in the opposite direction. We eventually looked back, and it was gone, so we ran away. The freaky thing is, my mom is really susceptible to that kind of stuff, and when we got close to the border, she just had to leave. She felt something so bad there that she couldn't get close until she had to make a full-on holy water exorcism on the border to push it back. It seems it worked. She just says, there is something really dark in there, and since the first ghost encounter, I have never gone back to that place. I spent my childhood, until I was 9, in McLean, Virginia, suburbs of Washington, D.C. I lived there with my parents and 3 siblings who were much older, 14, 16, and 17, until they had all moved out by the time I was around 6. The house was single level with a large finished basement. I had various paranormal experiences as a child. The most common was a woman's voice randomly saying my name, even when my parents were out in the yard and I was alone in the house. It was never threatening, just a woman with a normal voice calmly saying my name. Though, of course, it scared the hell out of me. The other experience I had was really creepy. Sometimes if I woke up in the middle of the night, a scene would be playing on my bedroom wall, always the same scene, an old-fashioned horse and buggy pulling up and a woman getting out. It was faded and jittery, like it was being played on an old projector, and had a sort of strobe effect. Always the same scene, and then it would just stop and the room would go dark again. The last experience I had was the scariest and thankfully the last. It was the week my family was getting ready to move. My aunt and uncle had come down to help, and I was playing hide and seek with my cousins. I hid in a downstairs closet. The last thing I remember is a sensation of hands around my neck strangling me. The next thing I remember is my cousins standing over me screaming for help. My parents rushed me to the emergency room. They checked me over and could find nothing wrong. The doctor concluded I had suffered an asthma attack, though I had no history of asthma before or after that one event. So we move into a newly built, and absolutely the most unhaunted house in existence, and over the years I just chalked my experiences up to an overactive childhood imagination. Fast forward 10 years, and I'm now a freshman in college, and my brothers and sisters are all in for Thanksgiving. Conversation turns to the old house in McLean, and my sister says, I never was so happy as the day I got married and moved out of that haunted hellhole. This is the first time I have ever heard any of my family members say they had similar experiences, so for the first time ever, we began comparing notes. My sister told us about seeing a woman in a white dress on several occasions. In one instance, she was laying in bed on the phone when she saw a woman walk into her bedroom, stand by the mirror, fidget like she was putting on an earring, then just walk out. My sister said she assumed it was our mom, though mom was always the blue jeans type, so my sister was curious why she was dressing up. So my sister hung up the phone and walked into the kitchen, and mom was just standing at the sink in her blue jeans doing dishes. She asked mom if she was just in her room, and mom said, no. I've been doing dishes for the last half hour. My brothers seemed embarrassed and wouldn't go into too much detail about what they saw. They just kind of blew it off by saying, we say some strange things, but we were smoking a lot of dope at the time, so who knows what was real and what wasn't. Likewise, my mom said we were pretty much all crazy, as she had spent more time in the house than anyone and never saw anything whatsoever. Though my sister told me later that wasn't entirely true, as mom had told her once when she was much younger about seeing the women in white. She just said that mom was just so determined that none of them talked about it around me when I was young, and the subject was so off limits that mom had actually convinced herself it never happened. Then my dad tells a really scary story. He said that after he and my mom got married and bought the house, and before any of us kids came along, his niece was trying to get a job in DC, so she asked if she could move in until she found a job. He told her yes and fixed up a bedroom in the basement so she could have some privacy. The first night he and my mom were awakened to a loud scream. Dad grabbed his gun from the nightstand and rushed downstairs, thinking there must be an intruder. His niece was sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale white and a look of terror on her face. He tried to get her to say what happened, but she would just shake her head and refuse to talk about it. She absolutely would not go back in the basement and wouldn't even get near the basement door when it was open. She slept upstairs on the couch for 2 days until she could make arrangements to go back home. She wouldn't even go back in the basement to get her belongings. Dad had to pack them up for her. He really never had much contact with her after that, but eventually asked her mother if she ever said what she saw. Her mother claimed that she had seen someone come into the room. She thought it was just my dad coming back after having forgotten to tell her something. But when she sat up to talk, the figure of a man was grinning at her with a swollen, blackened face, eyes swollen shut, covered in blood, and grinning teeth protruding from shriveled purple lips. After hearing all this, my sister got curious and did some research. The house was part of a group of houses built by a housing developer in the mid-1920s. At that time, most people lived near where they worked, but he got the idea that he could build a housing development for upper-income federal workers who would like to live in a more rural setting and commute to work. This idea was actually about 25 years ahead of its time, as suburbs really didn't exist in the 1920s. He worked out a deal with a contractor. If he built the houses, he could have one of his choices as payment. Unfortunately, when the stock market collapsed and the country went into depression, both the developer and the contractor lost everything. The contractor ended up hanging himself in the house he had picked for himself, which, you guessed it, was ours. The house sat empty for several years before being bought by a couple with no children. The husband died shortly thereafter, but the wife lived there for the rest of her life until she passed away and my parents purchased it. Reading between the lines, I think the bad spirit in the basement that my dad's niece saw and tried to choke me was the ghost of the contractor who had killed himself in the house. I think the lady in white was harmless, maybe even protective. She was probably the old lady that had lived there prior to my parents. I also think she was the one who whispered my name. As for the horse and buggy, I don't think that was really even related to the house. It was just some scene from long before the house was built that replayed over and over.